Hello, and thanks for joining us here on Encore. Coming up on today's film show. Ready Player One is Spielberg's latest utopian oasis. We saddle up with The Rider, and documentary America dissects a country at a crossroads.
This isn't just a game. I'm talking about actual life and death stuff.
No more riding, no more rodeos. If you don't stop, your seizures are gonna get worse.
We will make America great again. God bless you and good night. I love you.
Well, to take us through this week's new releases, I'm joined by Lisa Nesselson, our film critic. Hi, Lisa.
Hello, Olivia.
We're starting with a film by Steven Spielberg, who needs no introduction, I don't think. His last film was The Post, delving into the very analogue world of newspapers. Now he's hurtling forward into the future, the sci-fi zone of Ready Player One. This is a video-generated haven known as the Oasis, inhabited by avatars. Tell us more.
It pains me to admit that video games take in more money than movies do. Therefore, they're probably important, whether I play them or not. It's also worth noting that the received wisdom now is that many people expect the news reports of the future to be interactive, that so-called virtual reality will be so expected and so comfortable that somebody merely reading about a school massacre or migrants drowning in the Mediterranean will expect a "you are there" option to enhance the information. And if this really is the direction we're headed, permit me to ask a prominent figure from the past to express my reaction.
OK, that's your feelings on virtual reality. Well, before this descends into despair, let's hear from Spielberg on the film and get a taste of what it looks like.
I'm a gamer. I've been a gamer all my life. I've even designed some video games. But when I first read the book and started working on the script with Zach Penn and Ernie, the thing that I said was, I want to make a movie for people who have never in their lives even played one video game. You don't have to know about video games or even have played video games to understand at the end of the ride you're about to go on, it's not an impediment for really having a good time watching Ready Player One.
They called our generation the missing millions. Missing not because we went anywhere. There's nowhere left to go. Nowhere except the Oasis. It's the only place that feels like I mean anything. A whole virtual universe. It's a place where the limits of reality are your own imagination.
Now, the film is set in 2045 in Columbus, Ohio, in a vertical trailer park where drones deliver pizzas. And we meet our protagonist, Wade. Wade, played by Tyler Sheridan, was born in 2027, and that was after the corn syrup droughts. Now, we used to think that the Battle of Hastings mattered, at least people in Britain did, but here it's the Battle of High Fructose Corn Syrup. Wade, in a very long and detailed voiceover, tells us that he's an orphan and that most people, himself included, spend most of their time and form most of their friendships in the virtual reality haven called the Oasis. What can you do there? What can't you do there? You can climb Mount Everest with Batman. Ready Player One absolutely gushes pop culture references. Some of them made my heartstrings go zing. You gotta love a digression into Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, and some of the pop culture references had me wishing everybody on screen could be avatared and feathered. I just know that bad puns will be the Bitcoin of the future, don't you think?
Oh, well, then that's when we'll be millionaires.
So on January 7th, 2040, the geeky, nerdy, introverted inventor of the Oasis, played to spacey perfection by Mark Rylance, died. But living on in video form, he says he incorporated a so-called Easter egg, a nifty hidden prize, into his creation. The first person to find 3 keys will win his entire fortune and control of the Oasis. So a soulless corporation, is there any other kind, wants to find those keys and will stop at the proverbial nothing to get there first. But Wade and a select group of other gamers are very determined to prevail.
OK, so this is a Spielberg film aimed at young people. Can we guess who's going to prevail, the youngsters or the adults?
Well, when it comes to Spielberg, I would rather watch The Post or Lincoln or Bridge of Spies any day over E.T. But Spielberg is enough of a master storyteller to inject plenty of suspense about who might ultimately triumph, even though we can pretty much guess who that's likely to be. The major sticking point for me as a viewer is that game design is so, how shall I put this, technical term, ugly. I mean, I don't think that playing violent video games makes people violent. In fact, I think it does the opposite. But I do think that spending hours with ugly visuals ultimately takes its toll. So I'm not saying that Grand Theft Auto should include a visit to the Louvre or that World of Warcraft should stop for a performance of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, but do all the characters have to be so damn ugly? Virtual reality may take over, but in fact, this film boils down to a real-world car chase. And remember, feel free to dazzle your friends with the insight. Reality is the only thing that's real, but the film's message about self-reliance and teamwork and taking time out from technology is a good one.
Okay. Well, from a special effects heavy production to, with a huge budget, in fact, to a more modest film next. The Rider is a semi-documentary shot on an American Indian reservation with non-actors going about scenes from their daily lives. Now, what did you make of it?
Well, I'm in the minority here. Most of my colleagues were deeply affected by this film, and they've been gushing about it. It was one of the best reviewed films shown in Cannes last May, but I was almost completely unmoved. I don't think I have a heart of stone, but I just didn't care about the protagonists. Now, you mentioned that the action takes place on an Indian reservation. I think you did, which is where Chloé Zhao shot her first film, Songs My Brothers Taught Me. This is her second. The central figure is a lanky young man who doesn't particularly look like an Indian. He's 1/4 Lakota Sioux, named Brady. His whole life has revolved around animals, particularly horses. He's a dedicated rodeo rider, and he loves the complicity between man and beast, and all that is splendidly communicated, mostly visually. But Brady has a steel plate in his head. His hands are shaking from a form of palsy, and if he falls off a horse one more time, he may end up paralyzed like the tetraplegic friend he goes to visit, or he could even die. Now, we can feel the tug of his yearning to get back in the saddle, and we know that would be incredibly stupid on his part. And we can see how miserable he is trying to make a living, doing sort of a straight job, making money for his family. His mother's dead, his dad has a gambling problem, and he has a seriously disabled sister. Let's take a look.
What I'm teaching right now is pressure. There's a good boy. Yeah, oh, no. All right. Keep going. 1, 2, 3. Go for it. Yep. See that? It comes off like that.
His dad never had no buck. He just would let us get on, but he would always keep an eye on us.
That's a very specific genre, fictionalized biography, and that can be a bit of a challenge, right? Especially in this case.
Yeah, in this case, absolutely. I'm told that about 60% of it is true to life because the people we're showing here are absolutely real, and yet it's hard to believe that anybody would be quite so stupid in the choices they make. If they were completely fictional characters, then you could sit back and go, well, that's kind of idiotic. But because they are real people, all you can do is be horrified at how self-destructive they are, and it's not through substance abuse or bad company, but of all things through love of communing with animals.
Difficult one to judge there. Now, we're moving to what we'd call perhaps a real documentary from a director based in France who's turned his gaze on your country, America, which is the title of the film. It's an exercise in trying to work out how the current occupant of the White House ended up there.
Do you know? If you leave your native land, whether you like it or not, you end up representing your country. So people from Liechtenstein have to be especially careful. There aren't that many of them. As an American abroad, I'm this close to writing to the Republican Party and demanding that they put out a brochure in French explaining their policies, because I get pounced on by people when they find out I'm American, wanting to know, how could you let this happen? And it's exhausting. I wish I could hand them the names and the addresses of my 65 million fellow citizens who voted as they did. I'd like to replace Make America Great Again with Make America Comprehensible Again, which is what director Claus Drexel sets out to do. So starting in the autumn of 2016, Drexel, a French filmmaker and cinematographer of German heritage, went to interview people in a small Arizona town whose fortunes have declined since a faster road replaced the iconic Route 66 about 40 years ago. He talks to people before the election, in a a bar on election night and after the election. It's edifying, funny, and occasionally terrifying. Drexel's previous documentary was a gorgeously shot and sensitively made portrait of homeless people here in Paris. He brings the same fine eye and respectful demeanor to his project, and people open up to him with, we're the beneficiaries of that candor, as misguided as it may be. And it's very difficult not to translate one's own culture biases to other cultures. And I had an example of this just yesterday when I looked up the review of this film in the French daily Le Monde, and the critic says the director interviewed ordinary Americans prior to what she called the second round of the U.S. presidential elections, except there is no second round in America. There is here in France, but in the U.S. you vote and that's it. Many of the interviewees are leery of career politicians, and they find Donald Trump's message, if not appealing, then at least a chance to shake things up. Well, if that was really their wish, they got it. Unfortunately, the rest of the world is on the receiving end too, which brings me to my friend.
Oh no. On that note of some despair, we'll leave you with a portrait of the United States as captured by the documentary America. Lisa, thanks so much for joining us this week. Remember, you can get more arts and culture on our website, and you can keep up with Encore on social media too. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.
Just because you drive through on I-40 doesn't mean you've seen Arizona. What you do, you'll love it or you'll hate it. And if you hate it, we don't want you here anyway.
Even if you love it, we don't want you here.
The U.S. has become a dumping ground for everybody else's problems.
I know you, and I know how you live, and I know what you stand for.
Trump for president.